Hello everyone, welcome to this video discussion. In this video, I shall be talking about a research conducted by Peter Collock and Mark Smith from the University of California, Los Angeles. This computer-mediated research is titled Managing the Virtual Commons, Cooperation and Conflicts in Computer Communities. Nowadays, we cannot deny the fact that there are already a number of computer or virtual communities. For example, we have social media. And in these social media, we could see that there are different virtual communities available or existing. For example, we have pages, groups, we also have chatting systems. And commonly, these communities are composed of different personalities, different individuals, or members with different personalities or features. And so it is very important to talk about what is really common among these members in that virtual community and how they contribute to the growth of that virtual community. As an introduction, computer-mediated communication systems are believed to have powerful effects on social relationships. The way we communicate with people online or virtually could also be one good way for us to build strong social relationships. Although it's happening virtually, we cannot deny the fact that relationships are formed even if it's in an online or virtual platform. Same thing goes in an actual social setting. So when we build rapport with the people around us, we are also strengthening our social relationships with these people. This new form of social interaction encourages wider participation, greater candor, and an emphasis on merit over status. So for example, if you're part of a group, let's say a Facebook group, it's easier for you to participate in a conversation or exchange of discourses because you have the freedom to express whatever ideas, emotions, or sentiments you have. And it's also easier to be straightforward or direct because there is no emotion hindering you as it is not an actual conversation happening. There is this virtual or online channel that you are using to express your ideas. And so for some, it's easier for them to express themselves that way than expressing it personally or using social interaction. Network communications will usher in a renewed era of democratic participation and revitalized community. So if we notice, people nowadays are free to express themselves in various platforms or virtual communities. There may be, for example, features that filter or screen whatever you post, but at least people already have been democratized in terms of expressing themselves. And so all or most of the people really practice that freedom of speech whenever they are engaged in online exchanges of discourses. One of the most basic questions in the social sciences is the problem of cooperation. We cannot deny the fact that even if it is in a virtual community setting, there is still this issue when it comes to cooperation. How do members of these virtual communities cooperate, most especially in terms of contributing, not only for the growth of the entire community, but also for the growth of the specific members? Computer-mediated interaction raises political, practical, and sociological problems in new ways and with new stakes. And so, it is very important that as, for example, in our case as linguists, we know how to analyze how computer-mediated discourses work in these virtual communities because some of these discourses may be political, sociological, or practical in nature. And so, people in these virtual communities use these discourses to express themselves, to establish relationships, and to build cooperation among other members of the virtual communities. At the root of the problem of cooperation is the fact that there is often a tension between individual and collective rationality. So we cannot deny the fact that if you are in a virtual community, there will really be conflicts. In many situations, behavior that is reasonable and justifiable for the individual leads to a poorer outcome for all. Such situations are termed social dilemmas and underlie many of the most serious social problems we face. So that is why it's also good to look at this perspective so that we better understand how conflict resolution or management happens in these virtual communities. Because whether we accept it or not, social dilemmas really are extant. They are existing in virtual communities. So one of the famous models of social dilemmas is the tragedy of the commons. I'm not sure if you have heard of this phrase before. It's by Hardin in 1968. Hardin described a group of herders having open access to a common parcel of land on which they could let their cows graze. It is in each herder's interest to put as many cows as possible onto the land, even if the commons is damaged as a result. The herder receives all the benefits from the additional cows, and the damage to the commons is shared by the entire group. Yet, if all herders make this individually reasonable decision, the commons is destroyed and all will suffer. Now, this is a perfect analogy for what is happening in a virtual common. What if you are that herder in the context of a virtual common? What will you do to make sure that even if you have this individualistic perspective of action, it will not affect the totality of the virtual community? So that's also something that you need to consider in the analysis of how discourses are exchanged virtually speaking. So let us use this analogy to better understand virtual commons. A related model of the tension between individual and collective rationality is the challenge of providing public goods. A public good is a resource from which all may benefit, regardless of whether they have helped create the good. The temptation is to enjoy a public good without contributing to its production, but if all reach this decision, the good is never created and all suffer. For example, you are part of a virtual community, and let's say the public good that could be considered in that virtual community is the exchange of meaningful or academic discourses. Now, how will you take part in such an exchange if you yourself is not really an active participant of such a virtual community? So the best way for you to address that problem is to make sure that as a member of that virtual community, you know how to contribute to the public good. Because you, within yourself, know that the public good will be for the benefit not only of yourself, but also for all members of the virtual community. Now, the tragedy of the commons and the challenge of providing public goods share a common feature. Let's take a look at this statement by Ostrom in 1990. At the heart of each of these models in the free ride is the free rider problem. Whenever one person cannot be excluded from the benefits that others provide, each person is motivated not to contribute to the joint effort, but to free ride on the efforts of others. If all participants choose to free ride, the collective benefit will not be produced. The temptation to free ride, however, may dominate the decision process, and thus all will end up where no one wanted to be. So, in the virtual community, we have this so-called free rider or free riding. So if you are a free rider, that means you are just benefiting from what is available as a public good in that virtual community without you actually contributing for the good of everyone. So it's very important that you, as a virtual community interactor or discourse maker, you know how to avoid the so-called tragedy of the commons or this free riding problem, and instead be someone who knows how to contribute well for the public good. Now, in the face of the free rider problem, how is cooperation possible? Well, if you look at it instantaneously, we cannot really say that there is cooperation in the first hand. The pessimistic conclusion of many researchers, according to Hardin in 1968 and 1974, is that in order for this free rider problem to be addressed, or in order for cooperation to be made possible in the virtual community, there has to be coercion. And that coercion should come from a strong external authority, which is very necessary to ensure cooperation. Other researchers, for example, Fox in 1985, even have argued that an external authority may not be necessary. It may even make the situation worse. So if we are to scrutinize the context of virtual communities, let's say Facebook groups, we know that these Facebook groups have their own admins, okay, or administrators. So the administrators there may serve as the strong external authority, which could induce this coercion within the virtual community. Now, what's very challenging here is that if you are the administrator, how will you make sure that there is enough amount of coercion being done or being ensured to the members of the virtual community, and so that there would also be conflict resolution consequently? Now, the question becomes, to what extent can group members regulate themselves, providing collective goods and managing common resources without recourse to external authorities? So, on one hand, it's also very important to consider the situation of those people who are just members of the virtual community. Let's say if it's an exchange of academic discourses, if you're a member, how will you make sure that you have enough participation or cooperation to the provision of the public good for the consumption of all members of the virtual community? So that's also one thing that you need to look at. Now, in terms of managing the virtual commons, Ostrom in 1990 studied a wide range of face-to-face communities which has a long history of successfully producing and maintaining collective goods. She found that groups which are able to organize and govern themselves are marked by the following ideas. So here are the ideas. First one, group boundaries are clearly defined. So meaning, if you are part of a virtual community, it is very essential that there are certain limitations or restrictions set not only by the external authority, but also by all members of the virtual community. Second one, rules governing the use of collective goods are well matched to local needs and conditions. So for example, if it is in a group page, let's say a Facebook group page, you have to make sure that the rules are for equity, meaning everyone benefits after the rules are, let's say, being implemented in that virtual community. Third one, most individuals affected by these rules can participate in modifying the rules. That means everyone is democratized. Everyone is given the opportunity to improve or modify the rules for the entire virtual community. Fourth, the rights of community members to devise their own rules is respected by external authorities. But this one is, of course, must be subjected to the decision of the external authority. Fifth, a system for monitoring members' behavior exists. So this one is pretty observable or noticeable in the context of virtual communities. This monitoring is undertaken by the community members themselves. So that is why, for example, if it is a virtual community, we're allowed to report people who misbehave or who do not really follow the norms of that virtual community. And then we have a graduated system of sanctions is used. So if in case there are, let's say, misbehavior or instances of misbehavior or misconduct, then the community knows what to do with that discourse maker or with that virtual community member. And lastly, community members have access to low-cost conflict resolution mechanisms. So that is why there are opportunities for exchanges of discourses where people can freely exchange ideas and express themselves, or for those people who have, let's say, committed a mistake or a wrongful act in the virtual community, then that person could be given the chance to explain himself or herself as well. Now, in conclusion, I know that understanding how virtual communities might be too difficult to understand if we look at it at just one with just one glance, because we also need to consider other aspects and other facets of virtual communities. As computer-mediated communication increasingly becomes the medium through which public discourse takes place, the ways in which that discourse is socially organized become consequential. You know, whenever, for example, if we are in a Facebook group page, whenever we utter words or whenever we post something on it, we know that every word or every discourse that we release for the public good or for the consumption of all members of the virtual community will have consequences. It's either the virtual community would accept your ideas or would reject them. So it's up to the rest of the members of the virtual community as well. Let's also remember the statement of Applegate in 1993. Computers are being used, in effect, to manage networks of relationships between people. And what's one good feature about virtual communities is that despite the diversity of ideas and the personalities of the virtual communities, we know that there will always be conflict resolution. So, virtual communities, through the use of discourses, should be able to identify how to effectively use these conflict resolution strategies present in the virtual community so that they may be able to have free opportunities to express themselves or to give their ideas towards other members of the virtual communities. So that's all for this topic. If you have any questions, please post them on the open forum. Thank you very much.